My name is Ismira Knox, and I never thought the most important moment in my life would start with my dad looking me straight in the eyes and saying something I still can't believe he actually said. One second I was sharing the happiest news ever. I had won $960,000 in the lottery. That is a lot of money, more money than I had ever even imagined having in my life. And the next second my dad was telling me how much of it I had to give to my little brother, Dorian. He didn't say, "Congratulations, Ismira, that's amazing." He didn't even pause for a moment to smile or hug me. He just said it like it was completely normal and fine. Half the money had to go to my brother or I could leave and never come back. The shocking part wasn't just what he said. It was how calm he was when he said it. He said it like it was a normal conversation for a dad to have with his daughter, like this wasn't a big deal at all. Like my whole life, all the things I had worked for, all the struggles I had gone through didn't matter at all. In that moment, everything inside me shifted. I wasn't just hurt or sad. I was done pretending I didn't notice that he always treated me like I was less important than my brother. When I finally stood up from the dinner table, I knew I wasn't just leaving a room. I was leaving a lifetime of being treated like I was second place. But I didn't know then that what came after, the messages, the pressure, the arguments, and all the fallout, would be far worse than I could ever imagine when I closed that door behind me. Before I tell you all the things that happened after that, I want to ask you, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you reading this from? I am curious to see how far this story will travel, and I like to imagine people all over the world listening to this story about my life. Thinking back to my earliest memories felt like opening a drawer I had avoided for many years. I grew up in a quiet town in upstate New York. From the beginning, it was clear that my family's attention was never really on me. My little brother, Dorian Knox, was treated like he was the sun. Warm, bright, and too important for anything to block his light. I didn't have the words for it when I was little, but I could feel it. My value in the house changed depending on how well I could stay out of the way. My dad, Malric Knox, was very serious. When he walked into a room, I felt like I had to sit up straight and be perfect. He planned Dorian's birthdays with the same intensity that some people give to very big work projects. Every year, Dorian's birthday had a theme, decorations, and a big party with friends and family. My birthdays? Usually we just ordered a cake from the grocery store and that was it. My mom, Maricel Knox, always said it was because they were busy or that money was tight. But that never seemed to stop them from giving Dorian what he wanted. By the time I turned 10, I understood how things worked in our house. Dorian asked for things and things happened. Baseball bats, league fees, private coaching, tournaments out of state. Everything was given to him without hesitation. I once asked if I could join an art program at the community center. Mom said it was too expensive and suggested I just practice with the art supplies we already had at home. I did it, but the message stuck. My dreams and requests were less important than his. As we grew older, the pattern became even clearer. Dorian struggled in school sometimes, but he was praised just for trying. I brought home honor roll certificates, straight A's, and my parents barely reacted. It wasn't cruel or mean. It was just that my achievements didn't seem to matter. By the time I was 16, the difference between Dorian and me was impossible to ignore. I had saved every single dollar I earned from babysitting, scooping ice cream, and folding clothes in the back of a local shop to buy a used car. It was old, it rattled when the heater turned on, and it smelled faintly of old carpet, but it was mine. Dorian turned 16 2 years later and got a shiny, newer car with a big bow on top, courtesy of our parents. They told him he deserved something reliable. I stood there holding the keys to my own car, realizing that reliability had never been a gift available to me. Even small, ordinary moments showed the difference. When Dorian forgot to do his chores, Mom excused it because he had sports practice or homework. If I made a mistake, the conversation turned into a lecture about responsibility. When Dorian borrowed money from Dad, it was helping him grow. When I asked for help with college application fees, I was told it was important for me to learn financial discipline. Looking back, none of these moments were huge explosions. They were little cuts, subtle, consistent, layer upon layer, shaping the way I understood my worth. I trained myself to expect disappointment so it wouldn't hurt so much when it arrived. I convinced myself that the best way to keep the peace was to be quiet, work hard, study hard, and never ask for more than I absolutely needed. What I didn't see yet was how this early pattern of who mattered and who didn't would follow me long after I left that house. It influenced choices I didn't even realize were connected to years of quiet favoritism. I carried the aftermath into adulthood without knowing it. And it would take much more than moving far away to understand the impact of those years. When I stepped into adulthood, everything became clearer, sharper, and sometimes harder to bear. College was my first real test of how much I could carry on my own. My parents made it very clear that they could not stretch the budget to pay for my applications. So I worked part-time during my senior year of high school and filled out applications late at night. I won a small scholarship and took out student loans to cover the rest. It wasn't perfect, but it meant I could leave home without waiting for anyone's permission. My independence didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a necessity. I taught myself to accept things without complaint. Once classes started, I learned quickly how to divide my time between studying, tutoring, and weekend shifts at a local bookstore. Balancing everything left little room for mistakes. Yet there was a strange comfort in knowing no one was watching me closely enough to expect greatness or failure. I belonged only to myself, and that privacy, even in struggle, became a form of comfort. Meanwhile, my brother Dorian went to a private college in Boston that cost more per year than my entire degree. My dad called it an investment in potential. My mom repeated the phrase until it sounded like it was the family motto. Dorian embraced the role with ease. He switched majors twice, played intramural sports, and called home regularly to discuss ideas for businesses he thought he could start one day. Every conversation ended with reassurance from our parents that they would help him when the time came. By the time I graduated, I had a degree, a balance of debt that made my stomach tighten, and a resume built from pure survival. I accepted the first full-time job offered to me, an administrative role at a logistics company in Syracuse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Stability was something I had never taken for granted. I rented a small apartment that creaked in the winter and overheated in the summer. Yet it felt like the first space that belonged entirely to me. Work demanded long hours and quiet competence. I learned how to manage schedules, track shipments, and solve problems before anyone noticed them. People often underestimated administrative workers, but the job taught me how systems function beneath the surface. I became someone the team relied on not because I was loud or ambitious but because I was steady. That steadiness gave me more confidence than any praise at home ever had. During this time, Dorian decided he wanted to start a chain of small fitness studios. He framed it as a community-driven project, but even in the earliest descriptions, it was clear he imagined something polished, fancy, and expensive. My parents responded with excitement I had never seen directed at anything I had pursued. They encouraged him to dream big, promised seed money, and helped him draw up plans. He visited Syracuse once to explore potential locations, and though he didn't ask my opinion, he explained the concept to me as if he wanted my validation, even though he didn't really need it. I listened not because I felt obligated but because I was used to standing quietly at the edges of his opportunities. It was familiar to me, supportive without being included. He seemed certain of success, and my parents echoed that certainty. I kept my doubts to myself, remembering that my concerns would not shift anyone's hopes for him. As months passed, my life took on a steady rhythm of work, budgeting, and quiet evenings spent trying to build something sustainable. Nothing about it was extraordinary, but for the first time, I felt like I was shaping a path without anyone rearranging it for someone else's benefit. I had learned to accept, to work hard, and to keep my dreams small enough that they wouldn't be dismissed. But even in that steady life, I didn't expect what was about to happen. Life has a way of shifting without warning. And the night everything tilted began like any other. I had just finished another long day at the logistics office, the kind that left my thoughts moving on autopilot. Buying a lottery ticket on the way home had become something I did out of habit rather than hope. It was a quiet ritual, a small gesture toward the possibility that my life could expand beyond the limits I had learned to accept. I never expected anything from it, so the slip of paper usually went straight into a drawer, forgotten until I remembered to check. That night everything changed. The lottery ticket I had purchased almost as a joke actually won. I couldn't believe my eyes. $960,000. That's almost $1 million. My hands shook, my heart raced, and for the first time in my life I felt something completely different. Excitement, possibility, and fear all at once. I called my parents immediately. I expected maybe a little cheer, a smile, or a "good job, Ismira." But instead, my dad asked one question: how much of that money I was going to give Dorian? Half the money, or I could walk out and never come back. That was the choice. I stood frozen. I couldn't believe it. All the years of being second, all the hard work, the sacrifices, the effort I had made, and it was dismissed in one calm, quiet sentence. My life had always been a backup plan for my brother. And now, even my good luck wasn't mine alone. At that moment, I understood fully what it meant to be treated like I didn't matter. And I knew I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't stay under that roof, couldn't stay in a life where my happiness was never allowed to shine. I got up and I walked out. Not just out of the house, but out of a lifetime of being treated like I was second place. That night, I took out my lottery ticket without really thinking. It was just one of those quiet nights, the kind where you don't expect anything to happen. I looked at the numbers almost like checking for fun, like when you peek at the clock or the weather and don't really expect anything surprising. Then I saw it. My breath stopped. Every single number on my ticket matched the numbers on the screen. One by one, I checked them again and again. My hands went numb from holding the ticket so tightly. At first it didn't feel real. Slowly, the truth started to sink in. I had won $960,000 after taxes. The number was huge, of course, but that wasn't the strange part. What felt strange was that nothing in my life had ever suddenly gone my way before. I had worked hard, saved money carefully, worried about bills and emergencies, and yet here I was, holding something I hadn't earned through work or struggle. I just had this sudden, unimaginable luck. I sat there for a long time alone, trying to understand what it all meant. I didn't feel happy. Not yet. I felt cautious. I had spent so many years thinking about risks and planning, stretching my budget, and preparing for emergencies that even sudden fortune felt like a responsibility. It felt like something I needed to manage carefully, like a fragile glass I didn't want to drop. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. And especially not my family. Keeping it a secret felt safer than stepping into questions I wasn't ready to answer. I didn't want anyone's hopes or expectations crashing onto me. It was a heavy secret, but it felt safer than letting anyone else know. The next morning, I made an appointment with a financial advisor. Meeting the advisor felt surreal, like I was talking about someone else's life. I introduced myself, explained the situation, and tried to stay calm. The advisor walked me through different ways to handle the money. They talked about investing, taxes, and long-term plans. Every suggestion came with calm certainty, which was very different from the whirlwind of emotions inside me. For the first time, I could see a future that wasn't filled with worry or fear. I began to imagine all the possibilities. I thought about paying off my student loans, which had been a heavy weight on my shoulders. I imagined taking a course to learn new skills, something I had always wanted but never could afford. I even thought about buying a place of my own, a small home where I could finally feel fully independent. These were simple, grounded ideas, but they felt magical because they were finally possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a careful plan piece by piece. I created separate bank accounts for different purposes. I looked at my budget and made a chart of how I would spend, save, and invest. I set goals that had always seemed impossible. There was a quiet satisfaction in doing all of this, a calm feeling that I had finally taken control of my life. For the first time, I was shaping my future without anyone else's expectations hovering over me. Even as I built my plan, the weight of secrecy lingered. Keeping something this big hidden felt heavy, like carrying a backpack full of bricks. Yet the thought of telling my family brought an even different kind of heaviness. I had seen how their moods and reactions could change based on money or opportunity. I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door. But as the days passed, I realized that hiding it forever would create problems later. I told myself they might simply be happy for me, that they could see this as a wonderful stroke of luck in my ordinary life. I imagined calm reactions, simple smiles, or even neutrality. I imagined anything but the tension that already lived in my shoulders. Finally, I decided to call home. I wasn't excited and I didn't feel obligated. I was careful. I knew from experience that history often repeats itself, even when you hope it won't. I had learned that people's reactions can be complicated and that sometimes, good news can bring unexpected stress. By the time Saturday arrived, I felt the full weight of my choice. I drove toward my childhood neighborhood, trying to feel calm but knowing I couldn't fully trust the calm inside me. Telling them had set something in motion I couldn't stop. When I stepped out of the car, the quiet unease I had carried all week settled deeper. The house looked the same, but the energy inside felt different. Not tense, exactly, just expectant, like everyone inside already knew what would happen next. When I walked through the door, my mother, Marisol Knox, greeted me first. Her smile looked practiced, almost like a mask, and it disappeared quickly, as if she had to remember how to act happy. My father, Malric Knox, stood behind her with the stiff posture he always used when he wanted to control a conversation before it even started. Neither of them said anything about the lottery. Neither said they were happy for me. Dinner preparations hummed in the background, everything arranged with unusual precision. The table had nicer plates, the chairs were angled just right, and my father's movements were careful and purposeful. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt strategic, like they had a plan. I took a seat, waiting for someone to speak, but they acted like I had interrupted something important rather than arrived for dinner. A few minutes later, Dorian Knox came in from the backyard. He said a small, half-hearted congratulations. It didn't sound real. He didn't look me in the eyes very long. Something in his expression suggested he already knew more than I had told him. My parents sat down after the food was served. I expected small talk, maybe questions about how I felt. But silence filled most of the early moments. They looked at their plates, at each other, and at me as if waiting for an opening they had rehearsed. I tried to focus on the meal, but the quiet tension pressed against me like an invisible weight I couldn't ignore. Eventually, my father cleared his throat. Instead of talking about the lottery, he began a long explanation about Dorian's business. He said it had problems, that investors were impatient, and that timing was critical for success. He never said it directly, but it was clear he expected my money to help. My mother nodded along, adding details about the sacrifices they had made to support Dorian. Every word felt deliberate, like they were creating a picture in which my money was theirs to use for the business. I stayed quiet, letting them speak. I didn't interrupt or question. The quiet parts of the evening told me more than the words. My mother avoided eye contact. My father leaned forward every time Dorian's name came up. Dorian sank deeper into his chair, like guilt was pressing down on him. My mother adjusted the silverware near my plate, a small gesture, but it showed discomfort and careful planning. She asked about my job, but her voice lacked warmth. Her questions sounded like she was checking if I could live on my own money rather than seeing the lottery as my own. Nothing in the conversation showed that they cared about what I wanted or needed. By the time dessert was served, the truth had settled in. This wasn't a celebration. It wasn't even supported. This dinner had a single purpose, unspoken but clear. They expected me to give my money to Dorian even though it was mine. My father put his fork down slowly and continued talking about Dorian's business. He said if Dorian got help now, the business could stabilize. His tone was calm, almost like he was reading from a script. My mother folded her hands and waited. Dorian kept his eyes on the table. No one said the number out loud, but it didn't matter. Their silence filled in the blanks. I felt a tightness in my chest. I realized I wasn't being spoken to, I was being spoken at. My father spoke carefully about responsibility, timing, and opportunity. Each word was chosen with care, and none of it acknowledged that the lottery win was mine, that I hadn't earned it or owed it to anyone. Finally, the expectation became clear. My father looked at me directly for the first time that evening. He said, "Half of your money will help Dorian's business. Nearly $500,000. This is necessary." There was no soft suggestion, no question. Just a statement of duty. My mother nodded, quietly supporting the plan without asking anything. The weight of it all pressed down on me. Everything I had imagined about how my family might react had been wrong. The money I had worked so hard to plan for myself was suddenly treated as if it belonged to them. I felt a mix of shock, confusion, and sadness. I realized that even when you share good news, people might see it in their own way, not yours. I sat there quietly, trying to understand what to do next. I knew I had to be careful, like I had been all my life. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family, expectations, and trust. And in that quiet moment, I understood that winning the lottery was only the beginning of a different kind of challenge. Dorian stayed very still in his chair. His shoulders were tight and he looked tense, like he was carrying a very heavy weight. But he didn't say anything. I noticed that nobody asked me how this would affect my life. Nobody asked what I wanted to do with the money. Nobody even pretended to care about my feelings or what I wanted. The room started to feel smaller and smaller, and the air felt thick, like it was hard to breathe. It reminded me of the old way things had always been in my family. I thought I had left it behind, but I hadn't. I could feel the memory of every time I had to step aside so someone else could get what they wanted first. Every time I had to put their needs before my own. Their faces all began to blur together, like one long line of people who had always expected me to obey. My dad's face got serious when I didn't answer him quickly. His calm voice became sharper. This isn't optional, he said, leaning forward. Family helps each other. And if you say no, you are choosing distance. Understand that clearly. I froze for a moment. I didn't move right away because I wasn't deciding. I moved carefully because I wanted to make sure I heard exactly what he meant. This wasn't a question. It was a command. The weight of it slowly settled on me. I stood up slowly and steadily. I hadn't felt steady like this in years. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called my name. My dad leaned back like my silence said everything he wanted to hear. My mom looked down at her hands. Dorian didn't lift his head. I picked up my coat, walked to the door and stepped outside without looking back. Nothing about that night was loud, but everything was very clear. In the days after I left, my apartment felt very quiet. The quiet felt heavier than anything my family had said or refused to say. At work, I went through my routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about one important thing. My dad had not asked for help. He had acted like he owned me, like I was a tool to be used. Once I realized that, all the unanswered questions I had about my family started to make sense. They weren't confusing anymore. They were consistent. Soon the calls and messages started to come. At first they were short. They accused me of being cold and ungrateful. Then the messages got longer and more dramatic. They talked about every sacrifice my parents believed they had made for me. Some relatives I barely knew suddenly seemed very interested in my morals. They told me to think about the family, to do the right thing, and to remember who had raised me. Nobody asked how I was feeling. Nobody asked what giving up nearly $500,000 would mean for me. The only thing that seemed real to them was the money. After a week of watching my phone light up with messages that felt like guilt tricks, I reached my limit. At work, I pulled aside a senior analyst named Talia Kier. I trusted her judgment. I calmly explained everything. I expected her to tell me it was complicated, that family always deserved exceptions. Instead, she listened and said one sentence that cut straight through all the noise. What my family was doing was emotional blackmail. Hearing it named out loud changed everything. That night, I blocked the family group chat and muted my parents' numbers. The silence that followed felt strange, but it also felt like the first boundary I had ever made on purpose. Keeping distance helped, but it didn't magically untie the knots I had been carrying since I was a child. I decided to find a therapist, Dr. Avelini Rourke. I sat in her office and tried to explain why walking away from people who had never really chosen me still hurt so much. She didn't tell me to forgive or forget. She asked me questions instead. She asked when I had first learned that my needs always came second. She asked when I had started to believe that love meant enduring more than everyone else. Session by session, Dr. Rourke helped me see that the lottery win hadn't broken my family. It had only revealed what had been there all along. With that clarity, I began making choices that belonged to me, not to anyone else. I paid off all my student loans in full. I sat down with my financial advisor and made a plan for stability instead of guilt. I saved money, invested, and built an emergency fund that finally felt solid. I moved into a safer apartment in a quieter part of Syracuse. I enrolled in a certification program that led to a promotion at work. For the first time, my progress wasn't treated as an inconvenience for someone else. It was simply mine. News about my parents and Dorian came to me indirectly. An old neighbor sent me a short message. Dorian's company had closed. My parents had refinanced their house to keep it alive, but eventually they had to sell it and move to a smaller place farther away. There were no apologies, no sudden insights, no request to talk. Just the quiet results of choices they had insisted I had no right to question. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty. The feeling never lasted long. I reminded myself that my parents had been given a chance to treat me as more than a bank account. They chose not to. What followed wasn't punishment from me. It was simply the result of a path they had chosen long before I said no. Over time, the sharpness of my anger softened into something steadier: resolve. I stopped replying that night over and over in my mind. I started paying attention to the life in front of me. Early mornings without fear or dread. Evenings without waiting for criticism. Friendships that didn't come with invisible costs or strings attached. Winning the lottery changed my money. Walking out of that house changed my standards. Money helped pay debts and open doors, but boundaries kept me from stepping back into a role where I had to disappear for others. If there is anything I hope you carry from my story, it is this. Just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean you owe them unlimited access to your time, energy, or wallet. Support that is freely chosen can be beautiful. Support that is demanded as a condition of love is something else entirely. You are allowed to say no even when the people around you are shocked. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to live a life where your needs come first sometimes. And when you do, you might find peace, happiness, and freedom that you never felt before. It didn't happen all at once. Walking away was scary. Being alone in the quiet felt strange. But slowly it became easier to notice the small joys of life. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, a safe and quiet home, a friend who truly listens. These were my choices, my rewards. Every time I thought about the money, I reminded myself that it was not the solution to everything. The real change came from learning to say no and choosing what was right for me. Money gave me options, yes, but boundaries gave me life. I realized that my parents' choices were theirs, not mine. They had tried to control me, to make me responsible for their comfort. I had thought that love and family meant sacrificing myself over and over. Now I knew that wasn't true. Love could exist without control. Family could exist without demands. I slowly started to trust myself again. I made plans for the future without guilt. I could finally imagine a life where I was free to grow, learn, and enjoy my time. Every small step I took reminded me that I deserved more than being used as a resource or a tool. And in that quiet, steady life I built, I learned the most important lesson. Saying no doesn't make you bad. Saying no doesn't mean you don't love someone. It means you love yourself enough to protect your life, your happiness, and your future. Sometimes when I think back to that night, I feel a quiet pride. Not because I won the lottery. Not because I walked away. But because I finally chose me. I finally decided that my life, my energy, and my happiness mattered. And that choice, more than any amount of money, changed everything.